Hello, you're welcome. You're welcome onto my channel today, and it gives me great joy to observe you are viewing this video. I'm Professor Olayinka Akonle. I'm a lecturer in the university. On this channel, I do a number of stuff, but all the stuff I do, you can easily cluster them into four. But sociology and research, are very central to what I do on this channel. And I do content also on relationship and migration. So you're welcome onto my channel once again. Meanwhile, if you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly go ahead and click subscribe on your screen right now. Tap subscribe on your screen right now to join my family of subscribers. So the video you are viewing today is on poverty. Poverty, the meaning, the types, the causes, the perspectives, especially within the broad framework of poverty and development. Development at multi-level, individual development, community development, national development, and even global development. So my discussion of poverty today is within the confine of development. How does poverty affect development? How can poverty be addressed, and how can it be understood, even for the perspective of multi-level development? So, and I want you to view the video of today from the the way it affects you, or it might affect you, and what you can do about it, and how it affects others, and how to build your capacity generally about poverty. As a major issue, if where countries are described as poor nations today, underdeveloped nations today, developed nations today, low income countries today, middle income countries today, all these fall broadly within the confine of sociology of development or development studies generally, or even development economics. So my discussion today is broadly within poverty and development. I will talk about the meanings, the types and causes and perspectives through which we can explain, development. You're welcome. Don't forget to click subscribe. So what is poverty? Poverty generally is regarded as a state where an individual or a group of people, a community, are not able to meet their needs. State of the individual lack of ability to provide or to meet the needs needed to have standard quality of life, or high or acceptable standard of living. So a state of you know individuals or communities lack of needed resources to live quality life. So when people are not able to live quality life, they don't have needed resources or sufficient or important resources to enable them to live quality life. We call that poverty. And some of these resources can be food, shelter, or income, even physiological needs. If you are adopting Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs, the basic needs of life, the shelter, the food, and physiological needs, including sleep, including sex, or these are basic things. So, but depending on society you find yourself or we find ourselves, we can look at poverty, from the angle of people's incapacity or lack of capacity to achieve, to afford quality resources, or resources that they need to live quality life. And this lack of capacity is very important, because when people look at poverty, they look at tangible things to say, okay, this person is poor, he's not wearing good clothes, he's not living in good houses, he's not going, people look at some tangible things, physical things. But there are also elements of they are not so tangible. One people also lack the capacity to compete globally or even within their environment. That is the most important part of poverty. Poverty can incapacitate an individual group of people, and lack of lack of needed resources to build capacity to be competitive in itself is also poverty. So any poverty intervention must target the capacity of people, build capacity of people, not to give people palliatives or handouts, but address the root cause of that poverty. That's what we call transformative development, transformative, you know, elimination of poverty. In which case we can talk about teach people how to feed, or don't give people what to eat, teach them. how to fish. Don't give them fish. Teach them how to fish. That's transformative. So you have to pay attention to people's lack of capacity to achieve resources, to achieve their desired quality of life, to compete, their lack of capacity in itself. Talk broadly about poverty. Anybody with lack of needed capacity is considered poor. And there have been so many analysis of poverty, interventions of poverty. We talk about people who are not able to spend up to $2 a day as being poor in terms of absolute terms. We start off $1 a day, we will increase it to $1.5 a day, $2 a day. But even this income threshold, dollar benchmark, is already being criticized sufficiently to the extent that people are now going to ask questions. What $2 can buy in the US? Is it the same thing they can buy in Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya or South Africa? So there's also about the purchasing power capacity of money. And poverty cannot be measured only in financial terms. That's why I will move to the next thing about types of poverty. So I've listed 4 types of poverty in this video. Number 1 being absolute poverty, which is inability of people to have basic resources that includes food, shelter, physiological needs. That's absolutely people are unable to feed. When people are not able to live in a house, when they are destitute, are not able to live in befitting house, are unable to meet their physiological needs, we turn them to be absolutely poor. They talk about relative poverty, which talks about comparing a group of people or an individual with others in the same culture or identical culture. So the individual may not be absolutely poor, but when compared to others in terms of what is able to do, achieve, or capacity, the person another individual can be said to be relatively poor. So that's another level of poverty. I've mentioned absolute, I've mentioned relative, then we can talk about generational poverty. This is a situation where people across different generations in a community, in a family, in a group, they have the same incapacity to live quality life, to have good standard of living across different generations. We term this generational poverty. They have not been able to break the siege or the trap, the poverty trap, one generation across the other, continue to perpetuate poverty. Then a very common one we now use is multidimensional poverty, whereby we don't look at poverty in absolute terms alone. We don't look at it at relative terms alone. We look at it across different dimensions. That is, you can look at different variables, different values. You may look at it in the angle of education. You may look at it in terms of health. You can look at it in terms of career. You can look at it in terms of wealth. You can look at it in terms of environment. You can look at it in terms of so many things. So when you look at in some countries have lower absolute poverty rates, but may have higher multidimensional poverty rates. And that is why our multidimensional brings so many variables together in the analytical pool to look at it. And that is, we look at people based on what they have, access to resources and possession of valuable resources, and bring all of these variables or factors together to look at how much an individual have of these variables, or how many they have of these variables, and judge them and calculate their extent of poverty at that point in time. Somebody may not be poor in terms of education, but may be poor in terms of health, may not be poor in terms of health, but may be poor in terms of social capital, or economic capital, may not be poor in terms of environment, but may be poor in terms of education, may not be poor in terms of some other. But the important thing is that these are objective, at the same time subjective. Some of them, they are based on the context or construction of that society. You can bring this to the issue of Max Weber and Karl Marx analysis of class. For Karl Marx, I have a video on Marxism and a video on Max Weber on this channel. For Karl Marx, if an individual does not have the means of production in a mode of production, I have a video on mode of production also you can view, is considered poor. But for Max Weber, it's not only based on ownership of means of production in a mode of production. It's not only if you have the means of production in a mode of production, you are rich. If you don't have, you are poor. For Max Weber, you may not have the means of production. You may not be the owners of means of production and the mode of production, but you may have other values, like maybe charisma, education, handsomeness, traditional, position or religious position. So in multidimensional, you may have a an objective variable, but you may not have another objective variable. So the poverty is then a continuum that we can look at across spectrum. So this multi-dimensional poverty is very important. So what are the causes of poverty? This is very complex, and very complicated. There are economic causes, in which we can talk about unemployment, we can talk about underemployment, we can talk about poor wages, and this is where you find many poor countries, underdeveloped countries, or developing countries, analytically speaking, or we saw low middle income countries, like the World Bank now categorize them. So lack of employment, underemployment, low wages, poor wages, high labor turnover. These are causes. Even people don't have jobs, when they don't have employment. Countries with high unemployment tend to have higher poverty. They talk about social factors. There are also factors that we can consider social that can make people to be poor. You talk about culture. You talk about inequality. Lack of education, competitive education. It's not like functional education. Culture. There are cultures that disempower people. Don't forget I mentioned the issue of empowerment. People having the capacity to be, to compete globally. You talk about inequality. Some countries, for example, you talk about gender inequality. That's why we now talk about feminization of poverty. There are more women are in poverty than men, especially in society that are traditionally patriarchal, where women are considered unequal. Some society don't educate the girl child, saying they can't waste money on women or a girl child because she will be married away to another family. So if you don't empower women, you don't educate them, you are feminizing poverty, because in the long run, they will not have the needed capacity to compete and live quality life. So social factor, culture, inequality, lack of education, and some norms and values in society can push some group of people into poverty. In society that are closed society, mobility is impossible in terms of social mobility. There's a video on social mobility on this channel. View the video. But those ones that are based on ascription, it's a closed society. You have in some traditional society and in some society in Asia. But society that are open, that are based on achieved status, then people can move. If you view my video on Industrial Revolution and French Revolution in Origin of Sociology, you will find this as part of the reason for the French Revolution and even the Industrial Revolution. Then we can have environmental factors that can make people to be poor. The issue of climate change, people are not able to farm again because of climate change, or you have some environmental disasters, flood. Flood just happened in the US that swept away over 100 people. They are still looking for them. Those people, even though it doesn't matter how rich they are, if they were not well insured or well invested, they can move to poverty. Earthquake, volcano, landslide, flood, climate change, all of this can push people into poverty, even no matter their classes, the class before. Then you also have political causes, where you have societies where you have corruption, high level of political instability, misgovernance. All this can push people into poverty. Even on environmental, when people don't have access to what we call wash facilities, water, sanitation and hygiene, this can push people into poverty. It can be a demonstration of poverty, as symptoms can also push people, predispose people to poverty. So when also society on political terms are very corrupt, few people grab resources more for everybody. Definitely, poverty will be there because there will be unequal distribution of resources, nepotism, tribalism, patronage, and the rest of them. So, misgovernance, political instability, when you have unstable government policies, unstable government over time. And there are perspectives that have explained poverty. You can have human capital perspective, which some people have called human capital theory. And I think this is very important. This theory of perspective explains that this perspective is very individualistic. That some people are in poverty because they have not invested sufficiently in skills that they can use to compete out of poverty or to live quality life. So that means individuals from this perspective have to invest in themselves to be competitive, to crawl crawl up north from that side of poverty. So that means individuals and groups have roles to play in exiting poverty trap or continually be out of poverty. So human capital theory says individuals are in poverty because they have not invested sufficiently in themselves. So invest in yourself, not to be in poverty. And the same thing, countries who have not invested in their human power, their manpower, citizens tend to be in poverty. Like I find in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and other people. And then you also have the culture of poverty. You need to read Oscar Lewis in Culture of Poverty. Oscar Lewis said people in poverty have the tendency to perpetuate poverty through their attitude, behaviors, and their culture. Children born into poverty tend to be socialized into and through poverty, and they imbibe the internalized cultural norms and values that also make them to live in a way that they continue in that poverty trap. Oscar Lewis, Culture of Poverty. So people also develop culture of poverty in their attitude, behavior, orientation, in a way that they continue to live in poverty. That's why you have generational poverty. Many generations are socialized into poverty to live in a way that allows poverty to fester. They also have social exclusion, like I've said, in terms of when you exclude some people from the mainstream of society, like the disabled people, poor and vulnerable people, people with disability, young people nowadays. I have a book on youth exclusion, in contemporary global order, across the world, where I looked at people, young people all over the world, how they've been systematically excluded and how this is festering underdevelopment in them. So women also tend to, the elderly, the old people, young people, women, even children, and people living with disability, minority groups, migrant communities tend to experience poverty disproportionately because of social exclusion. You also have structural functionalism that believes that the structure of society at macro level, their dysfunction also have the tendency to build, when they don't function harmoniously, effectively, it also builds poverty ultimately. Then you have the conflict perspective or Marxism, where it is believed that it is the oppression of the upper class or by the upper class of the lower class that first up. This class antagonism, perpetual exploitation of capitalism, of exploitation of labor, that makes people to be in poverty while the rich continue to be rich through capital accumulation. So generally, poverty and development are related. Most countries are underdeveloped today because of poverty that continue to perpetually, disempower people. Then development projects today in many poor countries are driven towards eliminating, eradicating, or reducing poverty. So poverty is usually at the center of development projects. For example, of the World Bank, of the United Nations, USAID, before dismantling by Trump and being dismantled by Trump. Many, even Canada, Australia, all developed countries have, development projects in poor countries targeted at empowering people, strengthening institutions, organizations to be able to tackle poverty. So poverty can lead to underdevelopment, and underdevelopment can lead to poverty. So the effort of development projects and partners, stakeholders, is to attack poverty, because poverty continues to breed poverty intergenerationally. Until poverty is tackled, underdevelopment may continue to be the order of the day. To achieve development, poverty needs to be sufficiently, harassed and eliminated. Till I see you in my next video, kindly go ahead and click subscribe. Bye for now.